The sky is blue, grass is green, and I absolutely love the Tales franchise. Take a shot every time you see me talk about this franchise in detail or briefly throughout this channel, because damn it, this is my favorite video game franchise. If that wasn't apparent enough with me bringing it up and in my countdown that I made, which you should totally watch by the way. And earlier this year, we were given the latest entry in the franchise, Tales of Berseria. To put it shortly, this game was absolutely amazing and made it into my top 3 for a franchise already full of consistently great games. One big reason for that is due to this game having, in my opinion, the best story in the entire series. Every aspect is top notch, so I decided to explain myself and discuss why it tops plots from games like Vesperia, Exilia, Symphonia, so on, so forth. Be warned though, this video will be spoiling Berseria rotten. If you have any interest at all in playing this game, I highly recommend you do so. It's a fantastic Tales game and a phenomenal JRPG at that, so I definitely recommend it to anyone. But for those of us who already played the game or don't mind spoilers, hope you're in it for the long haul because I have a lot to say on this gem. Without any further ado, let's rip right into this. Before we begin, and for those of you who don't know the premise and ignore my spoiler warning, let me briefly go over the story's premise. The game stars Velvet, our first standalone female protagonist. She lives a simple, easy life with her little brother Laphicet and brother-in-law Artorias. Her brother suffers from a sickness that makes him mostly bedridden, but that's okay because she has friends and just loves living a simple life with her family. But that's all stripped away from her one day when the Scarlet Night hits. Creatures known as demons start attacking, and this gives Velvet an awful sense of deja vu because years ago this same thing occurred and that night her sister Celica was killed. And when you know it, something similar happens here as her brother is killed right before her eyes, and the murderer is surprisingly Artorias himself. This sends her into blinding rage, and she's seemingly killed herself, but with her willpower being as strong as it is, she survives and is turned into a demon herself, bent on getting revenge on Artorias for killing her brother. So, yeah, that's already a crazy setup, but it's also one of the big reasons the story's as good as it is. Here, let me explain. This game was advertised as something that'll make you feel badass, a female protagonist with angst, and I wanted to know why. Thankfully, this game has this great habit of showing and not just telling, so we're introduced to Velvet before her life becomes a living hell. The first hour or two of the game is just getting introduced to our lead and the important people in her life. A small, secluded village, an easy life. That's all she ever wanted, and in turn, the player starts to feel happy for her and enjoys what they're shown. But because it's a revenge plot in a game made by Namco, you know that things are about to go to shit. The whole setup and execution are so expertly done. We're dragged in and fooled into loving the characters of Velvet, Artorias, and Laphicet. But Velvet gets betrayed, Laphicet is killed, and the murderer and traitor is none other than Artorias himself. He sends the story and the lead down a spiral of hatred, and the player in turn is affected as well because they had to experience that betrayal too. The intro is so well done and emotional, not only because you get to experience all the events for yourself, but it also doesn't waste any time. It gives you enough to hold substance, but doesn't overstay its welcome like the childhood arc in Grace's F. You get what you need to know, a few bits and pieces of delicious chocolates here and there, and then you're thrown into the real meat of the story, as it should be. And another reason this story works so well is that this game never loses focus on its main driving force. Look at nearly every other Tales game. Your objective changes over the course of the story. Not always a bad thing, mind you. In fact, a lot of the time it works, like in Symphonia and Vesperia. But in games like Exilia, the role of main antagonist and main driving force becomes a game of hot potato, and you're just left to wonder where the hell this plot is going. Here, though, the objective is to get revenge on Artorias for murdering your little brother right before your eyes, and the story never falters from that. Sure, some complications arise over the course of the main story, and that mission starts to mean a lot more than it seems at first glance, but the fact of the matter is that the main goal is always the same, and I like that. A lot. It allows for the story to get more interesting over time, and I'm never lost. Like when you realize that Artorias' goal is to brainwash all of humanity, you, of course, aren't down for that. So not only are you getting revenge for selfish reasons, but it's also doing humanity a big favor. A lot can be analyzed just from that conflict alone, because it directly correlates with the game's main theme, will versus reason. Is it right for everyone to have free will? Is a perfect world possible without everyone having the same mindset? Is it worth reaching a perfect world in the first place? So many questions come up with that theme, and a direct conflict between your party and the opposing side is never black or white. There's so much gray in this theming that I'm surprised this game had any color to begin with. It's made even more interesting because the plot is told from an interesting perspective. Your group, the protagonists, can be seen as the villains here, whereas the antagonists, the exorcists, are more heroics and the populace. Or so it seems. It's a direct parallel with Zestiria, where you were the shepherd and you were facing the Lord of Calamity, but here you are the Lord of Calamity and the main antagonist in a sense is the shepherd, which I thought was a very nice touch. It's all about really analyzing them and dissecting how they really act and develop over the course of the story. The protagonists start off extremely selfish, with everyone kind of using each other for their own personal gain. They don't care for each other. Velvet wants revenge on Artorias, Rokuro wants to challenge the world's greatest swordsman, Aizen wants to find his Captain Ifrit, and Magilou has ultimately become bored with her existence, so she's just here for entertainment's sake. Only Eleanor and Fee can be seen as the two with relatable motives, as the ones who aren't entirely selfish. Fee is trying to live his life to the fullest and fight for the ones he cares about, and Eleanor has realized just how corrupt the exorcists are and decides to fight for her beliefs, even if they don't align with who she thought they did before. There's a lot of "I'm only here because I want this," and because of that, not only are the characters a lot more interesting and the dynamic interactions are that much more, well, dynamic, but it perfectly lines up with the theme of will versus reason. These characters have so much free will and do what they want when they want. This in turn causes trouble for a lot of the general public, which makes them see the characters as villains, but the will allows them to be entertaining and likable in the eyes of the player. They're living their lives on their own accords and living by the quote, "The world ends with you." Sorry, I couldn't resist. On the other hand, the exorcists are all about reason. Their question is, what's the point of having free will if it just causes chaos and turmoil for everyone? It's the difference between sacrificing one versus many. Artorias was willing to kill his brother-in-law to help his plan of brainwashing all of humanity and achieve a perfect world. And that's not entirely insane, since he truly holds the people's best interest in mind. It's just because of his one-track mindset that he's opposed against. And the personal affairs in people's lives tend to make them fight against him. Velvet, of course, being the biggest example. If that wasn't enough, it's later revealed that Artorias is a tragic villain, since he feels responsible for the death of Velvet's older sister, Celica. The hatred towards this man never falters, but you can still see where he's coming from. It doesn't stop the player's desire from seeing him defeated, but gives another angle on the situation, making him one of the series' better written main villains. It doesn't stop with Artorias though. All of the main antagonists are so much more deeper than I thought, and entertaining on their own. And I know I keep calling them antagonists, but it's easy to understand that they can't really be seen as blatantly evil, even if antagonist doesn't necessarily mean evil to begin with. Take Melchior for example, probably the only one out of the group that can be seen as malice. He's fully aware of how corrupt the exorcists have become, but doesn't care because he wants a perfect world full of nothing but reason more than anything. Ironically, it's the direct opposite with Oscar and Teresa, who truly have the populace's best interest in mind. They both could be heroes in the light of the story if the situation were a bit different, which is why when you finally kill them in the story, it's one of the more bittersweet and emotional moments. Shigure, well, he's the most rival-like out of the group. That's there mainly to help Rokuro's character, and definitely one of the weakest out of the bunch in my eyes, but yeah, no. For everyone else, their relationships and interactions help to strengthen the plot and reinforce the theme that much more. Velvet versus Artorias and Magilou versus Melchior being my favorites, not only because of how entertaining and interesting they are to see play out through the course of the plot, but how they both use the game's themes to their advantage. I'd say Velvet and Artorias use the theme of revenge to a greater extent than will versus reason, and Magilou and Melchior are the exact opposite. I feel like I've talked about Velvet and Artorias' relationship enough already, so I want to focus on Eminem. This video isn't sponsored by Eminem. It's revealed much later on in the game that Magilou was Melchior's student. However, she was dropped because of her being a failure and never reaching Melchior's standards. She was almost on the exorcist's side, but her personality and will was just too strong to be overcome with reason, so she just got dumped. But honestly, girl, look at this guy, raise your standards a bit. Anyways, their chemistry is a direct correlation with the theme of will and reason. Magilou is someone who lives her life for the sake of finding some form of entertainment. That's why she sticks around. She doesn't care about much of anything, but has found the most enjoyment she's had in a while seeing how Velvet and the gang stories all play out. So clearly she'd be against the thought of the world being full of monotone similar people. Melchior, however, only accepts perfection, only accepts a perfect world and hates free will more than anything. This makes him incredibly cunning, diabolical, and a pain in the ass to defeat in the story, but ultimately separates him in terms of strength from Magilou. I believe they're both equally as strong both mentally and physically, but for different reasons. By physically, I mean magically. Of course, fantasy terms are confusing. However, Melchior's obsession with being perfect leads to his downfall, as he makes a pact to never bring harm to any flowers, and Magilou, being the person she is, uses this to her advantage to allow Velvet to finish him off. Of course, this also brings up the theme of revenge. Even if Magilou wasn't the one who gave the killing blow, it really was her who took him down. Because despite her not wanting to admit it, a part of the reason she hates him so much is because her getting dumped out of the blue and being told she wasn't good enough broke her spirit. Or as this game says it, broke her heart. Don't, please. It's a great part of the story that helps to reinforce the game's themes, and was just great to see play out. In fact, the characterization in this game was a big factor as to why I enjoyed the story. They're well written and bounce off each other well as this series normally does, but there's a lot of depth to them and they play well with the themes of the game, which is why they stand out even more in this case. Not to say that the other games don't do that, I love Vesperia's cast as much as I do because they pretty much do the same thing. But in this game's case, it's just played up even more, which is why I notice and applaud the effort even more. The characters and characterization as a whole aren't the only reasons why the story works so damn well though. Not only is the plot itself focused, but also manages to have mini arcs in a sense without making them feel that way. For example, the whole Earth Pulse points part of the game where you have to wake up the world's Therians consists of you going from place to place and doing different tasks. This can be seen as something like you going from temple to temple in a Zelda game, or in other words, checking off items on the shopping list. But here they all play out seamlessly and seem more like a continuous story rather than different mini arcs as I called them before. This is because the further you go, the more you find out about Anominons, what they're trying to stop. It also plays into the characters as they continue to develop over the course of what happens in the plot. Mysteries are being uncovered, the story progresses as normal, and all the bases of what the plot's been setting up can be touched and then some. It's a genius formula, and one I feel the other games have been trying to do, like Symphonia and its whole world regeneration plot, and Exilia 2 with the chapters. Not to knock those games down or anything, because they do work there, but not nearly to the extent that this game does. And finally, let's talk about the game's final hours. With Anominon being revealed to be Velvet's late brother Laphicet reincarnated, a lot happens in the game's final hours, including what's probably my favorite moment in the entire series due to the resolution of Velvet and Feast's characters, and the theme of revenge getting its resolution in a sense, fighting for the right reasons. I absolutely loved seeing the cast get their words in when facing Artorias and Anominon for the final time. So in character and developed, going along with the game's themes, oh, love that shit. Velvet and Artorias' relationship also comes to a great conclusion here. See, Artorias poses a question at the beginning of the game not only for Velvet but for the audience. Why do birds fly? And that keeps coming up over the course of the story and directly correlates with the theme of will and reason, because Artorias' answer is that birds fly because they have to. But Velvet finally comes with her answer of birds flying because they want to. And that payoff was honestly so damn satisfying. It also marked the end of Feast's character arc because he, starting as a lifeless husk, has grown a personality and will to fight against this world's equivalent to God and living his life on his own terms. I love that, and Velvet finally defeating Artorias not only for revenge but to save the world and prove herself was such a great climax to that conflict. It was so well built up and satisfying to both the plot and her character. But the ending itself is kinda bittersweet, and I think that was the best possible outcome here. Velvet and Anominons have to stay in a deadlock for all of eternity to balance out the world's malevolence without needing to brainwash all of humanity. But in turn, Velvet will be stuck there forever. It's sad, but fitting for someone who caused so much damage in the public's lives, and it's her doing her part to fight for what she wants to believe in, free will, so the sacrifice isn't in vain at all. And even Feast sacrifices himself by turning into the White Dragon so he can do his part in ridding the world of excess malevolence as well. So the two give up their lives for their beliefs, and the rest of the crew do what they can as well. Damn, I love this ending so much, because it's kinda sad but such a fitting end to the story. It made me a little emotional, not gonna lie, but don't tell anyone, that's kind of a secret. So let's wrap this up. All the way to the end, the game was consistent in terms of storytelling. It was dark, mature, deep, and satisfying, but I loved every minute of it. The Tales of series is better known for characterization than an overall plot, but because this game gets both, it just stands out that much more. And I could honestly keep going on, but I think you all get the picture. Berseria is a masterpiece, not only as a game, but as a story, and for that I applaud it. After all, it's one of my favorite games of 2017 for a reason, and in my favorite franchise full of consistent titles, I think it speaks volumes when I say that Tales of Berseria is one of my all-time favorites.